The American West is dying. Rivers that carved the Grand Canyon are now trickling streams. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, has dropped so low you can see the remnants of drowned towns emerging from the mud. Wildfires consume millions of acres every summer, turning the sky blood orange and forcing entire communities to breathe through masks for weeks. And then the US government does something that sounds completely insane. They start releasing millions of dam-building rodents into the wild. I'm talking about beavers, the same animals people trapped to near extinction for fancy hats in the 1800s. The same creatures suburban homeowners call pest control to remove when they flood a backyard. The government is now parachuting them into remote canyons and creeks across 11 western states. Scientists call it rewilding. Skeptics call it ecological recklessness. But here's the number that made me stop. One beaver family can store more water than an Olympic-sized swimming pool, naturally, without any human maintenance. And they can transform landscapes at 1,000th the cost of conventional engineering. So is this a desperate last hope to save ecosystems on the brink of collapse? Or an uncontrolled experiment that could spiral into an invasive species nightmare? Let's find out. Right now, the western United States is experiencing its worst megadrought in 1,200 years. That's not hyperbole. Tree ring studies confirm this is the driest period since Charlemagne ruled Europe. The Colorado River, which provides water to 40 million people across 7 states, is at historic lows. Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the two massive reservoirs that were supposed to drought-proof the West, are at less than 30% capacity. You can stand on the Hoover Dam and see the white bathtub rings on the canyon walls, showing where the water used to be. Wildfires are burning with an intensity and frequency that has no historical precedent. In 2020 alone, over 10 million acres burned. That's larger than the entire state of Maryland, gone in a single year. Communities in California and Oregon now live in smoke for months. Air quality reaches hazardous levels. Children develop asthma at twice the normal rate. For ranchers, farmers, and native tribes across the West, water scarcity isn't an abstract future threat. It's an immediate crisis threatening livelihoods that families have maintained for generations. Wells are running dry. Irrigation allocations are being cut by 30, 40, sometimes 50%. People are making impossible choices. Sell the cattle, abandon the land, or watch everything die slowly. And here's what most people don't realize. 90% of the West's original wetlands are gone, just vanished. The network of streams, marshes, and riparian zones that used to act like a giant sponge, storing water during wet periods, releasing it slowly during droughts, has been destroyed. The current system of massive concrete dams, centralized reservoirs, and irrigation canals is failing. These structures are aging, expensive to maintain, and they trap sediment while destroying downstream ecosystems. They're also fundamentally vulnerable to climate change. When precipitation patterns shift, when droughts intensify, these rigid systems can't adapt. But this water crisis didn't start with climate change. It started 200 years ago with hats. In the 1800s, beaver felt hats were the fashion across Europe and America. To meet demand, fur trappers slaughtered an estimated 400 million beavers across North America. By 1900, beavers were functionally extinct across most of their range. And when the beavers disappeared, entire ecosystems collapsed. Streams that had meandered through valleys, held in place by beaver dams, suddenly straightened and began cutting deeper channels. Wetlands dried up. Fish populations crashed. Birds that depended on wetland habitat vanished. The water table dropped as the landscape lost its natural storage capacity. For 2 centuries, the American West has operated without its primary ecosystem engineer. And recent studies are proving what indigenous peoples knew all along. Beavers were the keystone. Their dams slow water flow, allowing it to spread across floodplains and recharge underground aquifers. They prevent catastrophic floods downstream. They create fire breaks, wet zones that don't burn. They filter pollutants and sediment. One beaver dam can seem small, but a family of beavers builds multiple dams in a cascading series. The cumulative effect is massive. Water that would have rushed downstream in days now takes months to move through the system, soaking into the ground, filling aquifers, sustaining vegetation. With climate chaos accelerating, scientists had a realization: we can't engineer our way out of this. We need nature's engineers back. This isn't just ecological restoration. It's existential for over 60 million people who depend on Western water. Before anyone proposed releasing millions of beavers, officials tried everything else. Massive concrete dams like Hoover and Glen Canyon were built in the mid-20th century. They work, technically, but they're aging, cost hundreds of millions to maintain, and they destroy ecosystems downstream by trapping sediment and altering flow patterns. California invested in desalination plants to turn ocean water into drinking water. The costs are astronomical. Over $2,000 per acre-foot of water, more than 10 times what traditional sources cost. The plants are energy-intensive and produce toxic brine that has to be disposed of somehow. Water rationing has been implemented across the West. It's politically unpopular, economically damaging, and it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. The landscape itself has lost its ability to retain water. Cloud seeding, flying planes that spray silver iodide into clouds to increase precipitation, has been tested extensively. In the best conditions, it might add 10 to 15% more snowfall, but it's unreliable, expensive, and when there are no clouds to seed, the plains can't help. Reforestation alone helps, but without water retention, trees die during droughts. You need water storage at the landscape level, not just more vegetation. Why are all these solutions insufficient? Because they're top-down, high-tech, and fragile. They require constant human maintenance and massive budgets. None of them address the core problem. The West has lost its natural water storage and distribution system. The Beaver built wetland network that existed for millennia before we destroyed it. The proposal is audacious and surprisingly simple. Restore 25–30 million acres of wetlands over 10 years by reintroducing 2 to 3 million beavers across 11 western states. The target zones are degraded streams, dried creek beds, and former wetlands across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, California, Arizona, and New Mexico. We're talking about over 500,000 miles of waterways that historically supported beaver populations. Here's what makes this feasible. The infrastructure still exists. Old beaver lodges, even abandoned for decades, remain in many areas. Vegetation like willows and aspens, beaver food sources, can be replanted relatively easily. The landscape remembers what it used to be. The engineering plan has 3 phases, and phase 1 is already underway. First, capture and relocate nuisance beavers from urban and suburban areas, where they flood roads, golf courses, and properties. These beavers are currently being trapped and killed. Instead, relocate them to restoration zones. Second, breed beavers in controlled facilities to scale up numbers rapidly. Beavers reproduce reliably in captivity and can be released when old enough to survive. Third, and this is where it gets wild, strategic aerial drops using parachutes. Yes, seriously. This was actually done successfully in Idaho in 1948 with a 98% survival rate. They put beavers in wooden boxes, attached parachutes, and dropped them into remote wilderness areas. The beavers walked out and started building dams immediately. Once released, beaver families get to work. Each family builds 1 to 3 dams. Those dams create ponds and wetlands that recharge underground aquifers, filter pollutants and sediment, provide fire breaks, and create habitat for fish, birds, amphibians, and insects. Biodiversity explodes in beaver-modified landscapes. The economics are striking. It costs $1,000, $2,000 per beaver release. Traditional stream restoration using heavy machinery and human labor costs $1 or $5 million per mile. Beaver wetlands can hold 15 to 35% more water than surrounding landscapes. And here's the kicker. Beavers breed naturally. After 3 to 5 years, the project becomes self-sustaining. You don't need to keep releasing beavers. They do it themselves. Supporting infrastructure is crucial for this to work at scale. Vegetation restoration is happening across target zones. Planting willows, aspens, and cottonwoods that stabilize stream banks and provide food for beavers, encouraging them to stay and build. Monitoring networks are being deployed. Thousands of trail cameras, drones, and satellite imagery tracking beaver spread, dam construction, and water table changes. Scientists can now map wetland expansion in near real time. Wildlife crossings are being built over highways, so beavers can safely migrate to new territories without becoming roadkill. Community education centers are training ranchers and landowners to coexist with beavers. This is essential. If rural communities sabotage the effort, it fails. The key innovation, flow devices. These are pipes installed through beaver dams that prevent flooding of agricultural land, while maintaining the wetland benefits upstream. Fish passage systems are being retrofitted where endangered salmon runs exist. Engineers build beaver dam analogs, human-made starter dams that guide beavers to build in beneficial locations without blocking fish migration. The total program cost is estimated at $500 million over 10 years. Compare that to California's proposed $20 billion water infrastructure overhaul. Even if the Beaver program doubles in cost, it's still a fraction of conventional approaches. But there are serious engineering hurdles. Preventing beaver dams from flooding critical infrastructure like roads and homes requires constant monitoring. Balancing beaver activity with agricultural irrigation needs creates conflicts. Western water rights law is Byzantine and contentious. Who legally owns water stored by beavers? Predator management is necessary because wolves and coyotes could decimate populations in some areas. Disease monitoring for tularemia and giardia is critical because beaver-infected water can spread to humans and livestock. If this works, the benefits are transformative. Economically, the program could create 10,000+ jobs in wildlife management, restoration ecology, and ecotourism. Wildfire suppression costs could drop by $2 to $4 billion annually because wetlands create natural fire breaks. Ranchers are already reporting 30% more forage growth near beaver wetlands. Wet meadows produce more grass for cattle. Tourism could boom. Beaver tours might sound ridiculous, but nature photography and fly fishing in restored streams are major revenue generators. Rural towns desperate for economic activity could see an influx from eco-lodges and guided expeditions. Trade efficiency improves because more reliable water means more stable agriculture, which means consistent food exports. Reduced water conflict between states means smoother interstate commerce. The environmental transformation is measurable. Water tables rise 3 to 10 feet in restoration zones. Endangered species rebound: salmon, sage grouse, amphibians. Beaver wetlands store 23% more carbon than comparable dry landscapes, helping with climate mitigation. Streams below beaver dams are 2 to 5 degrees cooler, which is critical for trout survival as climate warms. For communities, life changes fundamentally. Local, resilient water sources mean less dependence on distant reservoirs. Air quality improves because fewer wildfires mean less smoke. Kids grow up fishing and swimming in creeks that were dry ditches a decade earlier. Indigenous tribes reclaim traditional practices tied to healthy watersheds. The West could become a global model for ecosystem restoration instead of a cautionary tale of environmental collapse. But let's talk about what could go wrong, because the risks are real and significant. Financially, the costs are unpredictable. Beavers don't follow plans. They might colonize unintended areas, requiring expensive removals. Infrastructure damage is inevitable. Beaver dams will flood roads, farms, and residential areas. Lawsuits and repair costs could exceed $100 million annually. There's opportunity cost. $500 million could fund other water projects with more guaranteed outcomes. Economic disruption hits ranchers who depend on current water allocations. If beavers reroute streams, some lose access entirely. Environmentally, things get complicated. Beavers could outcompete native species for resources, creating invasive species dynamics, even though they're technically native. Disease vectors are a serious concern. Giardia spreads from beaver-infected water to humans and livestock. Tularemia, a bacterial disease, can spread through contaminated water. Ecosystem imbalance is possible. Too many beavers overdamming streams can kill fish from low oxygen levels. Unintended flooding could destroy rare plant communities or archaeological sites. Beaver ponds produce methane, a potent greenhouse gas, which could partially offset carbon sequestration benefits. Geopolitically and socially, this project touches extremely sensitive issues. Western water law is archaic, fragmented, and contentious. Who owns beaver-stored water? That question has no clear legal answer and will trigger lawsuits. State versus federal conflict is guaranteed. States jealously guard water sovereignty, and a federal beaver program could be seen as overreach. Rural backlash is already happening. Some ranchers are shooting beavers and destroying dams, viewing this as government intrusion. Native sovereignty issues are complex. Tribes want control over beaver reintroduction on their lands, but jurisdiction often overlaps with federal and state authority. International tensions could flare. Mexico depends on Colorado River water under a 1944 treaty. If U.S. beaver restoration reduces downstream flow, Mexico could claim treaty violations and threaten trade retaliation. So what's actually happening right now? Pilot programs in Utah, Oregon, and Wyoming have released approximately 10,000 beavers since 2020. Early results show a 40% increase in wetland area in treatment zones. Some ranchers report improved cattle forage and year-round stream flow for the first time in 15 years. Others report flooded pastures and destroyed irrigation infrastructure, but there have been delays and cancellations. California's program stalled due to environmental lawsuits from fishing groups concerned about salmon impacts. Montana suspended releases after beavers dammed irrigation canals, cutting water to farms. Federal funding was reduced by 30% in the 2024 budget cuts. Politically, this is divisive. Republican lawmakers call it federal overreach and a waste of taxpayer money. Environmental groups are split. Some praise it as visionary, others fear disease spread and unintended consequences. Listen to what people actually involved are saying. A USDA Forest Service biologist told me off the record, beavers are doing the work of a $10 million restoration crew for free, but the politics are killing us. A Wyoming rancher who was initially hostile admitted, "I wanted to hate this, but the creek on my land ran year-round for the first time in 15 years. I'm a believer now." An EPA official, speaking anonymously, warned, "If this fails, it'll set back ecosystem restoration policy for a generation." Only 0.5% of the target 2 to 3 million beavers have been released so far. The project is nowhere near its ambitious goals. The world is watching closely. Canada is collaborating on cross-border beaver corridors, recognizing that ecosystems don't respect political boundaries. The European Union is considering similar rewilding with European beavers for degraded waterways. China has expressed interest in beaver restoration for the Tibetan Plateau water crisis. But Mexico feels threatened. Reduced Colorado River flow from upstream beaver restoration could violate the 1944 Water Treaty. Mexican officials have demanded a seat at the planning table and threatened trade retaliation if water deliveries drop. The UN Environment Program cites this as a potential model for ecosystem restoration worldwide. The World Bank is considering funding beaver rewilding in drought-prone regions like Australia and southern Africa. Climate conferences now include beaver restoration and nature-based solutions discussions. There's also criticism. Some ecologists warn of ecological imperialism, imposing North American solutions in contexts where they don't fit. Geopolitical rivals like Russia mock it as American desperation amid climate failure. If the US succeeds, beaver rewilding could become a global movement. If it fails, skepticism toward nature-based solutions deepens, and the policy window for this approach might close for decades. Here's what I think after researching this extensively. The beaver rewilding program is neither the miracle some environmentalists claim, nor the disaster some ranchers fear. It's a high-risk, high-reward bet on whether nature can restore itself faster and cheaper than human engineering. Will beavers save the dying West? In some places, they already are. Streams that were dry for decades now flow year-round. Wetlands are expanding. Biodiversity is recovering. But will this work everywhere at the necessary scale? That's genuinely uncertain. The politics are brutal. The funding is unstable. The conflicts with agriculture and water rights are unresolved. The ecological risks, disease, overdamming, methane emissions, are real. What's certain is this: conventional solutions have failed. Concrete dams aren't enough. Desalination is too expensive. Water rationing doesn't solve retention problems. Something different has to be tried. Beavers offer a decentralized, self-replicating, low-cost approach that works with natural processes rather than against them. That's either genius or madness, depending on whether the unforeseen consequences outweigh the intended benefits. The stakes couldn't be higher. If this works, it proves nature can heal landscapes faster and cheaper than we ever imagined. It opens the door to rewilding as a legitimate tool against climate collapse. If it fails, if disease spreads, if conflicts escalate, if beavers cause more problems than they solve, then the West faces catastrophic water collapse within a decade. And the idea of working with nature, instead of controlling it, gets discredited for a generation. 3 years in, completion remains deeply uncertain. Politics, lawsuits, and budget cuts threaten the program constantly. Only a tiny fraction of the planned releases have happened. Who will win? Will beavers restore dying ecosystems? Or will the project collapse under its own contradictions? Do you think releasing millions of beavers is genius or madness? Could this approach work where you live? Drop your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious what people think about nature-based solutions versus traditional engineering. And if you want to see how this turns out, subscribe, because whether this project succeeds or fails spectacularly, it's going to shape how we think about ecosystem restoration, water management, and working with nature for decades to come. The West is still dying. The beavers are just getting started. The story is far from over.